I am so excited to be able to talk to the superhero, Carol Murchison, because, you are someone who is on the front lines. You are there fighting the good fight, really, literally, not just emotionally, really, literally fighting the good fight. And it is not easy. And this has been something that a lot of people have brought up to me about the legal system and what can be done and how to help the legal system become more aware. And there's so much I can't wait to talk to you about, but I'd love you just to take a few moments to introduce yourself, and then we'll start talking.
All right. Well, I'm delighted to be back. I was thinking it's been a long time
Yeah.
and that I have so much more perspective on
Mm,
what we're
mhm,
doing right now.
mhm.
And a lot of it is about how the legal system fails us. And so I'm really anxious to talk about that. But yes, I'm Carol Murchison. I'm a lawyer. I used to call myself a recovering lawyer because I had stopped doing litigation and was doing investigations. And then I stopped that and was kind of retired. And now I'm back to litigating. So I'm definitely not recovered yet from
Uh-huh.
being a lawyer. And my front line, as you said, the front line that I'm on is litigating on behalf of people who've been in religious, spiritual organizations and have been harmed. And sometimes that means cults or high demand, high control groups.
Yes. Yes. So, right. The first time you were on, it was really fascinating to hear about some of the situations that you were trying to help with. And we had an interesting conversation about a lot of things, but also this idea of consent, that there is
Mm,
this, right? That there
yes.
is this real misinterpretation of what that means, and that there really needs to be this idea of ongoing consent, that once you find out what was hidden from you, right, really
Hmm.
from the beginning,
Hmm.
then you should be able to make a better informed, fully informed decision if you're going to continue to give your consent for something. But I think that's why a lot of people don't come forward, because they say, well, I signed up for this, or people will tell them that, you know
Yes.
like you said it's okay to go on a date, but you didn't say it's okay to be attacked, right? Like, what?
Right.
That's not what you signed up for. So I would love for us to talk about what you've learned about the limitations. And also, at some point, I was seeing in some of the things that you do that you teach investigative skills, sort of how you
Hmm.
uncover,
Hmm.
how you find out what you need to find out. That's the other thing too, because I'm getting tired of needing to tell people the law protects the perpetrator in a way that it doesn't protect the victim in certain
Hmm.
situations.
Yeah.
But I'm also
Yes.
wondering if there is change on the way, what you sort of see happening in the future, if it's a hopeful picture or if we still have a lot of work to do to get there. So wherever you want to start, please
All
feel free.
right. Well, let's start with consent because I
Mm,
think that is one of the biggest issues. And I think that the issue of consent is even more than just continuing. Because what I think is that it is about almost at the beginning if you're being coerced. What we see in the groups that I litigate against is that they are what some people would call a cult, since the law doesn't really understand or know what a cult is, what a definition of a cult is, then we
mhm,
often say high demand, high control. So if you're in a high demand, high control group, which
mhm,
is exactly as that sounds like, a
mhm,
lot of demands are placed on you. You have to work for the organization. Often that's unpaid. You have to
mhm,
live. You have to perhaps wear clothing, even. In other words, there are so many demands that are made upon your time, your energy, your thoughts, all of those things. And then there's the control mechanisms. When you
mhm,
are in that kind of a situation, I think that we're seeing this is the hopeful part. I'll just lead with that. Maybe that's better. We're seeing some, a glimmer of hope under, and I don't know whether we talked about this last time, Rachel, under the Trafficking Act, which is
Oh, no.
odd, right? It sounds
Right.
very odd. So I
Mhm.
want to unpack that for people. So,
Mhm.
first of all, I think, and I think you would agree with me, that coercion negates consent. So if we think about consent as being willingly given, then if you are in a coercive situation, no matter whether it's psychological coercion or physical coercion, you cannot consent. So let me give you an example of physical coercion, which of course we all know. If I'm walking down a dark alley, someone comes up in back of me, puts a gun to my head, and
Mhm.
rapes me, we know we've been raped and we know that we did not consent
Right.
because there was
Right.
physical coercion. But what I understand that people say is we don't have an opportunity to fight that because we're being
Mhm.
coerced.
Mhm.
But what we don't understand as clearly under the law is that there is psychological coercion as well. So it's
Right.
not the gun to the back of the head, but it's the high demand, high control, coercive control situation in
Mhm.
which you cannot give consent because there are too many things that are impeding it psychologically and
Right.
sometimes physically. So
Right.
sometimes we have people who are living in an ashram
Right.
and that they have no money. They
Right.
cannot leave. So they have all kinds of barriers to actually being able to consent. And I think it's obviously important for the legal system to understand that. It's also important for those of us who have not been in these groups, but are allies,
Right.
whether we're family members, whether we're therapists, whether we're lawyers. It's important for us to understand that you
Mhm.
cannot consent when you're in a high demand, high control group. It's
Right.
also important for survivors of those
Mhm.
groups to
Mhm.
understand that they didn't consent because
Right.
they
Right.
couldn't. The coercion negated the consent. Now,
Right.
the glimmer of hope is that the Trafficking Act, the Federal Human Trafficking Act, which covers sex and labor, recognizes that coercion negates consent. It's
Uh-huh. Mhm.
unbelievable. And it does
Right.
not require, as we think it does, we
Mhm.
think of drop trafficking, and I'm guessing you are like me. When I first came in contact with this, I thought, well, trafficking is moving people across a border.
Right.
It's
Right.
not.
Okay.
It's not. What it really is, and the example that I think of all the time to think about trafficking is it is Harvey Weinstein. So
Mm.
if we
Mhm.
think about Harvey Weinstein, he was
Mhm.
actually found to have liability for violating the Federal Human Trafficking Act. I think it was in 2019. I don't exactly remember, but I remember looking at the article in the New York Times and thinking, what did I miss about Harvey Weinstein? That he was moving people over state lines. And so
Right.
I dug into it to find that really it's about fraud, force, or coercion. So simplified, like 100 times down, but the simplified version of that is he was having sex with women by fraud and coercion. And the
Mhm.
coercion was just like the fraud, it was if you do this with me, I'm going to hang out this little carrot at the end of this that I will get you something with a producer. That violated the Human Trafficking Act. And so
Right.
that is one of the laws that we have tried to put to good use with our clients because it's one of the few that again that recognizes the issue of coercion, which is a key issue when you're dealing with some of these groups, whether they're religious, spiritual, just run of the mill cults, whatever that it is, where that exists. The coercion is a key part of trying to bring a legal claim.
So, oh, this is so interesting. So, the things that I think about while you're talking are the things that make this muddier. I don't even know how to describe it.
Mm.
So many people are taught that whatever happened to them, they right? They asked for, they brought in,
Right.
they
It was their fault.
whatever they, right, they drew it to them. It was their fault. And also, if they're upset about anything that happens to them, then, right, then they are unspiritual. Then the magic is not going to work. Then, God won't shine on them, whatever else. I mean, these perpetrators have it just wrapped up in a bow, that people
Yes.
are going to blame themselves or they're going to get blamed. I mean, also the language. I think about terms like she slept her way to the top. Well,
Yeah. Oh,
no,
yes.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
really, what happened was usually a man, sometimes a woman too, will be the perpetrator, of course, but let's say
Yes.
a man. Really, it shouldn't be she slept. It's like the focus is on the wrong person. It's not that she slept her
Exactly.
way to the top, right? It's that he withheld a job, a
Yes.
promotion, anything until he had access to her body against her will, right? Like
Yeah.
that should be the way it's talked about, but it's turned around. So then even I hear even women using these terms towards other women. Oh, well, she slept her way.
Yes.
So we're acculturated to
Yes.
the reversal of who's at fault here too, you know?
Yes. Well, and it raises a very interesting point for me, which I think of because I was in one of my phases of either recovering or not recovering. I was an employment lawyer. So the law in the employment context recognizes that coercion and that power
Mm,
imbalance,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Because and under the law, they use the words quid pro quo harassment, for
mhm.
example. And
Okay.
quid pro quo harassment is sleep with me or you're fired. Or if you sleep with me, you will get a promotion. These
Mhm,
are coercive situations which the law recognizes completely as not being consent. So I sometimes joke about the first Supreme Court case that kind of looked at this situation happened to be a woman who her boss, I think, and this went all the way up to the Supreme Court, is she had sex with her boss, and the bank that was the defendant said like 42 or 52 times. And the Supreme Court said, basically, I don't care because it wasn't consensual. It couldn't
mhm,
be
mhm.
consensual when there was so much coercion at
Right,
stake. The
right.
coercion was even if you didn't say, sleep with me or you're fired, that
Mhm,
fear is there. It
mm,
is exactly the same thing in these other situations. The fear of the power imbalance, all of the things that you mentioned, the kind of the excuses and the wrapping things up in a lovely gauze of spirituality and religion, all of that creates fear. It creates
mhm,
an imbalance of power. It is
mhm,
coercive. And we have these places in the law that we can see that, how that
mm.
operates. So I am a person who taught sex harassment training for many years. And it's what I always used to say to people. Is it illegal? No. But is it risky? Yes, because you're never going to be able to prove consent. And so
Mhm,
if you are, and I think I just saw something, I'm not going to be able to recall the name of the company, but the CEO of some very large company,
yeah.
maybe last week, was fired for having a relationship with a subordinate, fired
Wow.
because you cannot know that it was consensual. So what
Mm,
companies have done is that they just said, no, it's not a good idea. If you have any power over this person, then it's not a good idea to have a sexual relationship. Or we have to know about it and manage it so that you're not having a coercive relationship there where you're
right,
holding, as you said, the kind of, you're not holding out the promotions, the firing, or anything like that. So
right.
we see that in a lot of ways. I think that the law is ahead of us culturally in that area because I
Mm,
too hear women saying, well, she, how she got ahead, you know,
right.
and
Yeah.
but the law understands that is potentially coercive.
I'm glad, really glad to hear that because when I see these reports, as I'm sure you do too, where you hear about a religious leader, a guru, whomever, And all of the charges that have been brought against him and all have been thrown out, that somehow he's still doing what he's doing decades later.
Yeah.
And he is leaving the walking wounded who have
Yes.
no recourse and feel helpless, hopeless, powerless in this world. And the legal system has reinforced that. And it's
Hmm.
also created more of a monster in this person who knows they can get away with it because it's happened time and time again. And then
Yes.
they get even more bold sometimes,
Yes.
which is so interesting that what has happened that maybe might not still be happening soon because of changes that were necessary to change the course of that, where it just is, you just hear this, well, yeah, he was brought up on 17 charges, blah, 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 and he still runs his organ. Like,
Yes.
wait, what? That
Yes.
doesn't go together, right? Why? Yeah.
Well, so I think that I have to back up and
Okay.
say, let's look at the two paths to the justice system.
Okay.
Okay. So we have the criminal path and we have the civil path. So we pretty much know the criminal path. We know that the police are involved. Probably they have to have a grand jury or he has to be indicted. You have to go through a lot of obstacles to the criminal path when, particularly when you are talking about sexual assault. I think that
Hmm.
our statistics on rapes that are reported, first of all, are abysmal. And
Hmm.
certainly the thing that you're talking about, which is not just in religious communities, but in society in general,
Hmm.
where we don't seem to take this seriously. And my example of that is the case that was called, I don't know if you remember it, Rachel, it was called the Stanford swimmer. So a woman was raped. It happened most times in rape, there's no witness, right? So
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
creates a problem
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
this case, the woman was drunk and it was late at night. Two men went by on bicycles, I think, saw this, thought that she might be in trouble, stopped, were witnesses to it, and she was unconscious. Now, we went through all of the obstacles of the criminal justice system.
Mhm.
She went to the police. The police did an investigation. Then the district attorney gets involved. Then there is discovery and there is depositions and there's a long path. And when you get to the end, which she did, she got to trial. She took the witness stand. There was a jury, and they found that he had raped her. But there was one more step, and that was the judge had to sentence the perpetrator. And
Mhm.
he would not sentence him to prison because he did not want to ruin his future. So there was a woman, and I believe
Mm.
she's written a book, and I wish I knew the name of it, and maybe we'll find it out and put it with the
Yeah,
notes to
yeah.
this webcast.
Uh-huh.
Because there was a woman who was so courageous in taking herself through the criminal justice system because the district attorney is not her lawyer. The district attorney
Mhm.
is the lawyer for the state. They do not, they try, I know, that's their obligation. So
Yeah,
sometimes there are plea bargains because
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
better.
Right.
Lots of uncontrollable things. She got to the end of that, and then I think we would have to say that justice was not served for her. Right?
Mhm.
Now, in
Mhm.
the civil justice system, nobody goes to jail.
Okay.
It's all about money. Sometimes there are other changes that we can ask for, an
Mhm.
apology. Although increasingly, I find that my clients do not want an apology. They're like, it's just going to be empty words, right?
Mhm.
And it's not going to be meaningful. They're doing it because somebody is forcing them to do it. So it's
Mhm.
mostly about money. And you have your own attorney. So that's not to say that we win in every case, but we battle to the end of every case. We're
Mm.
not under the same kind of restrictions that district attorneys are to a plea bargain or for a judge to
Mm.
say, no, this person is not going to go to jail. I find that it is a little kinder to the survivor than the criminal justice system is.
Wow, that's so interesting. Right, I remember hearing early on in this career of mine doing this work, people like Reverend Moon of the Unification Church, that he did a whole variety of really heinous things. And I've known members of his family. He has a very large family, and I see the fallout from what they've gone through. And so you can tell some really not good things happened there on so many
Mhm.
levels. But the way they get him legally is on tax evasion.
Yes. It's like Al Capone. That's how
Right.
they got Al Capone. Yeah. So
Right.
that's the criminal justice system.
Uh-huh.
So civil justice system, just to be, perfectly clear, is not perfect either. In the
Mm.
sense that, for example, let's talk about some of the obstacles to the civil justice system. You can have your own attorney. That's good because that person, I find that there's a lot to that I'll comment on a little bit later. But the main thing is that the law puts up some obstacles.
Okay.
So one of them is the statute of limitations.
Mm.
And we might
Mm.
have talked about that before. So that's one of the biggest obstacles that I see. I'm
Mm.
looking at a case in a state in the Southwest, and the statute of limitations for sexual assault is 2 years, unless you're a child. For a child,
Uh,
it's different. But that means that if you're 19, you need to have figured out in 2 years that you were sexually assaulted by a religious leader, a person who had
mm-mm.
your trust in a
Right.
community where you may
Right.
have been born and lived all your life, and
Mhm.
where this assault was framed as something that was beneficial to you. Maybe it was a religious practice, all of those kinds of things. And
Mm.
you have 2 years to figure that out. Well, you and I both know in your business and in mine, that just isn't reasonable. It takes people a very long time to come to grips with what happened to them. I have people that it didn't understand that they were raped until somebody actually told them. And 7 years it took to deal with
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
So we see that once you miss the statute of limitations, then you're out. You don't have a claim unless the state opens up a revival window that takes in old claims. And New York has done that. California has done that. The other states have done that. So, statute of limitations, we need for legislators to understand that it's not just children who don't understand what happened to them. Even as adults, psychologically, when we are in coercive control circumstances, we do not know whether we consented or not. And when we're told that we consented, when we're told that this was a positive thing, or if it wasn't positive, oh, guess what? That was your fault. It's even
Mhm.
harder,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And so we need more open statutes of limitations. Canada, bless them, no statute of limitations on sexual assault.
Wow, since what is that recent or is that
2019, maybe
Oh, wow.
2020, around
Incredible.
in that period of time. Most of the time with the criminal statutes, we can't go back. We can't
Mhm.
say, or most states have said, if you were assaulted in 1970 and you miss the statute of limitations, that's probably the end from a criminal perspective, because constitutionally there are problems with going back, but not from a civil perspective. Most states have recognized that it's okay to change the statute of limitations and make it retroactive. And
Mhm.
so some states have done that. So we've got a model for how we could be more in line with reality with these
Mhm.
statutes of limitations, because I should go back and say the statute of limitations is the period of time within which you can bring a civil claim. And so if it's 2 years and you don't go to therapy, for 4 years, and then it takes a year or more to figure out what happened to you, you have lost your right to make a civil claim
Oh
in
my
that
goodness.
state.
Wow. So, okay. So I'm thinking about this 7 years that you were talking about with this person, right?
Mhm.
Coming, let's say it takes 7 years just to understand what happened to you? Then I'm just thinking of this in terms of adding years onto that and why this takes so
Mm,
long. The shame that you're also in some cultures, in some religions, some groups, you're going to be bringing shame on your family.
absolutely.
And so you need to protect other people somehow.
Yes.
And that you're going to be re traumatized because that's
Yes.
what sometimes, and sometimes often happens in situations where there are attorneys there who are not you, who will just go after, right, the victim. And then people who will also still not have the language, like you're saying, they might not know how to say, how to translate, how to go all the way from one extreme to the other of this was showing God's love to me, or I was
Yes.
specially chosen, or something, all the
Yes.
way to I was violated and victimized.
Yes.
That's a big stretch.
It is a big stretch.
Right. And just having a support system, because you don't want to go through this alone. How long does it take people to develop a support system if they've left everyone and everything? How do they have the resources? I mean, this is already a long stretch. And so, yeah, I
Yes.
can't imagine in 2 years people
No.
getting this together. Yeah.
No, exactly. And why do we have this? Oftentimes I think, well, why are we doing this way? And again, I think it goes, Rachel, to what you alluded to in the beginning, which is when we say she slept her way to the top, we are not putting the focus where the focus needs to be. And so
Mhm.
I'm not positive, but I think that these things are short because they're like, well, if you're unreliable, you women
Mhm.
are unreliable. And so,
Mhm.
if you're going to be able to do anything, it's got to be within a short period of time because
Right.
otherwise, well, what will we be doing? We will be disadvantaging, this poor man. We'll be
Mhm.
ruining his life. How many times have we heard that? With
Right.
no,
Mhm.
absolutely no, like, wow, it's already ruined a lot of
Mhm.
people's lives, but we're
Right.
not concerned about that. There is still a very strong societal privilege to
Mhm.
the perpetrator.
Right.
And usually, as you said, usually it's male, not always.
Right.
But even when it's female, I had a trial lawyer tell me that when they look at a case and assess a case, and at a certain point, you have to say what your damages are and what you think that a jury would, would give someone.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
he said, if it's a younger, let's say a 19-year-old woman and a 45-year-old perpetrator,
Mhm.
okay, there's a certain, range of damages that are common, that
Right.
we know from other cases. But if it's a 19-year-old man and a 35-year-old woman, there will not be that kind of damages. The men in that position are in a completely, there's a kind of social thing. Well, that was just
Yeah.
boys will be boys, and that was
Mhm.
not a violation. When in fact it is. It's as much for a 19-year-old boy as it is for a 19-year-old girl. But juries are human beings. They've grown
Mhm.
up in an American culture, probably most of them, and they have the same biases, that other people do.
Absolutely right. I mean, I think even the term underage women, there's no
Yes.
such thing as an underage woman. It's a girl.
Yes.
Right? So, if you talk about underage women, then people, I think, have this diffusion in their mind, like, maybe it's not so bad because it was a
Right.
woman, and a
Yes.
woman, like, there's more of a sense of, well, maybe, she has those rights and she consented, etcetera. But if you just
Exactly.
say it for what it is, that it's a girl, then I think it makes it clear. But, yeah, I think there's this watering down so that
Yes.
people don't really see how heinous
Yes.
something was, you know?
Yes. And I think, again, that goes to the issue of consent, whether
Mhm,
what we've decided as a society, and the law reflects that, is that children cannot consent. So
mhm,
every state has the age at which is the kind of age of consent.
mhm,
Um, and let's say the age of consent is 16. So if you are 15, you can't say, well, she consented. You can say it,
mhm.
but it's not going to fly very far as a legal perspective.
Right,
On
right.
the other hand, if the age of consent is 16 and you are 16 in 3 days, then, then consent is going to play a part in this. And it is really, I think, not just for the kinds of cases that I deal with, which are these, spiritual, religious, cult, high demand, high control organizations, but just society in general. We need to have a better understanding of consent. We need to say it has to be ongoing, it cannot be coerced. And, we need to be able to tell juries that's the standard that they are holding this to.
Yeah.
We're able to do that under the Trafficking Act, but we don't always get there. Look at the P. Diddy trial. Did you follow the P. Diddy trial at all?
Oh, my goodness. I couldn't tear myself away from it. Wow. Yes. No, talk about an addiction. I was addicted to, and also with dread, because I was thinking,
Yes.
oh, right. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Right. So, yes, it's like people often ask me if I watch cult documentaries, and I'm like, no, I have enough of it during the day. I don't need to get it fed to me on Netflix.
Yes.
But I did follow it in print, and I did so with dread. And of course, that dread was rewarded with more dread. However, what I understand is that, well, so first of all, that claim that I was particularly following was the trafficking claim, the sex trafficking claim. So it's exactly the same one that I'm talking about now, except it was the criminal case, right?
Right.
Because he settled the civil case against him. So that often happens. She brought a claim against him civilly. Apparently, he settled immediately, but then the district attorney brought the criminal case. And, I have to say, bless them for even bringing these claims, that are hard, that you have to know that they're difficult to do, and that there was evidence that it wasn't coerced. But the only comfort that I take, Rachel, is that, and I just heard this, I don't know if it's true or not, so I may be passing on gossip to an entire audience of people, but someone said that, and I think this is true, I think I looked this up afterwards, someone said that their expert on coercion, who did the psychological evaluation, which is done in every trial, who did the psych evaluation in this case, the judge did not permit her to testify on coercion. So there was nothing. Now, that just seems like a terrible mistake. I don't know if it's appealable or not, because I'm not a criminal lawyer, but that is what I heard. And I read that as well. The expert who is well known and who testified at Keith Raniere's trial, I understand, in the Nexium case, was not permitted in this case to testify to the effect of coercion and how that can negate consent. And so you can understand on these trials that there are a lot of moving pieces. You don't know until you get into the trial and in front of the judge, perhaps that's, it's going to take out a piece of your proof and really your education of the jury. But it's an example of exactly what I'm talking about with the Trafficking Act, which is that what we need to prove is that there was so much coercion that there could not be consent.
Right. Okay. I'm wondering, also talking about the men in these stories, the ones who are victimized, the ones who, I mean, we can talk about the perpetrators, of course, and we will. It also happens that while women, girls, depending on the age when they come forward, that sometimes they just won't because of a variety of reasons.
Yes.
But that men and boys also won't. And that they will talk to me here in my office about how people say, how does that happen? I mean, how come you couldn't fight someone off? And how come you weren't strong enough? How come? And, or then they'll ask them, well, then is that your sexual preference or so? Like they'll sort of be curious then about their proclivities or whatever, like it matters at all. And that it has anything to do with a violation, right? But that there is something, it's very difficult. And I remember at the conference that I was at with you at Northwestern, It was so interesting to hear some of these people talk who were monks who
Yes.
said it's not considered sex, when a boy
Hmm.
comes into these places. And the religious leaders, who are by and large men, will just assume that they're going to be doing whatever they want to them physically, because if you do it with someone who is of your same gender, it's not sex. Right, so they really don't have the language for it, and so I wonder about these situations where it is dealing with boys and with men.
I think it's much harder, again, societally, right,
Mhm,
for
mhm,
a young boy or a grown man to come forward. It's another example of how much time is needed to be able to process it, to get your
mhm.
support system in place, to get your head screwed on straight. You don't
Right.
come out of some of these groups, like I talked to a young woman maybe a week or 2 weeks ago. She's 29 years old. She was born into a cult. She walked out in the middle of the night and escaped when she was 19.
Oh.
She had no idea of how to live a life in
Right,
society. There's
right.
just no way that within 2 years or any others short, in fact, 10 years is the statute of limitations on the Human Trafficking Act. So that's another big
Mm,
advantage that we have. It's a longer period of time, but even so, we see people who can't figure that out in 10
mhm,
years. I
mhm,
mean, people walk out of some of these organizations with no money. And so obviously, therapy isn't that easy for them to accomplish. There's often an anti therapy bias in these groups that they've grown up with, because who wants people to learn to think rationally or emotionally, have emotional well being? That doesn't serve the people who are taking advantage of
mhm,
all of these people in their groups. And so I think for young boys and men, it is an example of needing so much time when we're talking about sexual violation. We have such
mhm.
a skewed view of boys and men, kind of in an opposite direction as the skewed view that we have
Mhm.
of girls and women, that
Right,
they're
we do.
strong,
Yeah.
right? That they're
Uh-huh.
strong, that they should have fought somebody off, and yet they are subject to the same psychological coercion
Mhm.
as anybody else.
Yeah. Right, it's so true, and I think also people get lost in the weeds. Like, there was recently I was out with people who are friends who I assume sort of have a sense of, kind of modern thinking about things,
Yes.
I would hope. But suddenly you see it break down. Like, someone was telling a story about how a relative of theirs, who was a boy in school, was raped by a female teacher, and
Mhm.
you could see people stop and try to
Yeah.
picture this, like, how does that work? And it's like I had to get
Yes.
everyone back into the story. Like, let's not get lost in those weeds of trying to picture this,
Right.
but let's come back to how awful that must have been, and he had no one
Yes.
to tell, and because he knew this was gonna be the response, right?
Exactly.
Like, this
Exactly.
is all happening in real time. This is what they're up against, like,
Right.
"Really? That can happen?" You know?
And that is what I was saying before about the person who was the trial lawyer. In
Mm.
addition to all of that, that boy will get less from a jury in terms of damages
Yeah.
on average. Now, every case is different, obviously, but on average, than had it been a young
Mhm.
girl and a 35 or 40-year-old man.
Huh.
So it's a lot for young boys and men to deal with too in these
Mhm.
circumstances.
It's really incredible thing. I want to also ask you this. It's an interesting question I just thought of because I think about, and then I want to come back to what you're noticing that is moving us forward and it can make
Mhm.
us feel hopeful about where this is going and what you're participating in, really moving
Mhm.
this all forward. In my weird career, I have had a chance to meet some cult leaders,
Mhm.
and you've probably come face to face, right?
Yeah.
Right? And no doubt, some of them are interesting in that you really have a feeling like they really don't know that they did something wrong. They are so in the thinking and they're so trained, or it's multi-generational, they're fifth generation, whatever. This is how they're wired. This is how they think things work. And so there isn't remorse. And it's not the narcissistic type of a lack of remorse. It's the, I really don't understand why anyone is having trouble with this. And then they kind of float around in that space like, I'm just here and I don't know. And they're sort of lost. And then there are the other ones where you get a sense that they go back to their cauldron at night and they work on their plan. And so the end result is the same, right? They can still do heinous things, but that there are these different personalities that do it and for different reasons. What have you noticed?
Well, so I do notice that, for example, some of the religious cases, no matter what the religion, really people, and I think we can understand this because we encounter in our lives people who believe deeply in their religious ideology. And because the United States Constitution gives us that freedom, we see a lot of different beliefs in this country. And we are free to believe all of those, any of them that we want. So if I step back, then what I think is that we see that a person who has been born into a religion and has a deep belief in that. And if the religion then tells this person, you are a Swami, you are a guru, you are a Rinpoche, you are a Lama, then they believe it because it's just a very small extension of the belief and the culture that they've been, that they've grown up in. And I think, to your point, that I've seen a lot of perpetrators who truly believed that what they were doing was enlightening the victim. And to go further than that, I will say that many of their followers also adopt the same belief. So the people within a religion that might have that as a basis have the same belief. And so it's like an echo chamber, right? The perpetrator is saying, yes, I am gifted. And when I'm doing these things, of course, I'm enlightening. There are so many, it's hard to call them all up, but I'm teaching non-attachment.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I'm teaching non-attachment to the body, to your body, you to your body, when I'm doing this to you. And the people around that teacher, that leader, believe the same thing. And so they do things like bow and say, yes, Swami, yes, Rinpoche, yes, that's what you're doing. And so it's a continuous loop of the same message. And because they're often isolated groups, they're not living in downtown Philadelphia like I am and, riding the bus and, whatever.
Right.
They don't have somebody else. I often think that in some of these situations, if some of the victims had friends outside of the organization, that they could go out for coffee and they could say, oh, the leader of my religion just did this to me, and it's so that I will learn non-attachment, that the friend outside of the religion would be saying, girlfriend, that just sounds weird to me. Somebody would be saying, but nobody's saying that. Everybody's in the same, they have to believe it's part of the coercion. It's the thought control.
Right. Oh, it's so interesting. I'm thinking also that you say you live in downtown Philadelphia. I'm thinking of one of my favorite quotes by William Penn, Pennsylvania, William Penn, right? I may be getting this wrong, but that's actually part of the quote that right is right, even if everyone is against it, and wrong is wrong, even if everyone is for it. Which
That's
I
right.
love so much.
Yes. Yes.
They're
And that's exactly that. We become skewed.
Yeah.
And we all do as human beings, you know. I think one of the big misconceptions about cults, and maybe we talked about this before, was that people are like, well, that would never happen to me because
Yeah.
I'm either smarter or I'm more discerning or I'm, whatever.
Mm.
But the reality is it's inevitable and in certain, if the circumstances are right. It's
And I
like
think
brain science. It's brain science.
yes, absolutely right. I think influence is brain science, and I think
Hmm.
people don't realize that they fall under it daily as they're busy posturing and saying, "I
Yes.
would never," right? But meanwhile, they just bought into an MLM or
Yeah,
whatever
right.
else, or they're wearing an outfit that looks horrendous on them because it was the most in thing that they could buy because some
Oh,
marketer convinced them of
yes.
something, right? But,
Yes.
even in those smaller ways, we are influenceable, and
Hmm.
that's part of our survival, right? That's our social
Hmm.
mechanism that we can influence each other, well, for better or for worse, but that we're connected.
That's
And
right.
it,
And I
yeah,
mean, we even have people who are called influencers. And so,
right, right, yes,
right?
yeah,
And so
so
their
true.
job is to influence us. And
Uh-huh.
yes, I have made so many. I don't even want to think about the fashion mistakes that I have made over the years, Rachel,
Uh-huh,
because
right.
I've been influenced by something, a picture in a magazine. We have had some strange fashions that we've all adopted, and
We
so
have,
there we are. It's a
yeah.
great example of how we are influenced against our best interest.
Against our that's such a great way to say it. Yeah, I just looked at pictures of me from college in the '80s. Oh, hello. I mean,
Yeah.
I went my own way. Like, I was a thrift shopper because I liked
Yeah.
funky things, but still, I had big hair, and I shouldn't have. I mean, what? Why was I doing that? So, right. But right. So even small ways, big ways, but to have people say, "Oh, I would never," or "This would
Yeah.
never," or "I would never raise my
Mm-mm.
kids in a way where they would be vulnerable to this." People love to be superior, and why? Just stop
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering then about this, the system as it is, because there was this arcane part of it, early on, and still in many countries, as we hear these horrible stories,
Yeah.
in many
Oh,
countries,
yes.
it still is. People like Alan Shefflin, who was a colleague years ago who I really respected, he's since passed, and he was trying to infuse the court system with a knowledge about how people could get under it, like into a trance-like
Yes.
state, and that they shouldn't be held responsible, and that's something that someone else did to them. And it becomes like legal Darvo, right? Like everything gets turned around and the causal relationship, it lands on the victim over and over again. So what have you seen in terms of trends so that we can feel hopeful about what's happening here?
Well, I think that, from my perspective, of course, this is just, this is the front line that I'm on, is that in the civil justice system, I want to go back to what we said before about the two paths to the
Yeah,
justice
yeah.
system and the
Please.
failure. In the civil justice system, we have been suing, and this is a difference between criminal and civil law. We sue organizations as well as perpetrators. In
Okay.
some of our old cases, where New York opened up what they call a revival window, they said, if you've been sexually assaulted at any time, you can come forward during this 1 year. And so we saw a lot of old cases. And the thing that is my point is that in some of these old cases, the perpetrator was actually dead. And so we're suing organizations. Now,
Mhm.
this is good for a couple of reasons. I find that survivors are often harmed as much by the organization as by the perpetrator. In other words, they bring this forward and they are silenced. They
Mhm.
are, they are shunned.
Mhm.
They are, as you said, they are demeaned because they didn't understand how enlightenment worked. All of those things
Right.
happen in these organizations. So let's say that we sue an organization for, and what they're sued for is negligence. That is,
Mhm.
they knew before
Mhm.
this happened to this
Mhm.
person, or they should have known. So
Mhm.
when that happens, it doesn't bring down, at least not in my experience, it doesn't bring down the organization. But you better believe that when they have to pay out big money that they don't do it again. Or maybe they try to be more clever about how they're doing it. But I have to think that as bad as we're talking about the civil justice system being for survivors, it's also hell for defendants. So if you are running a religion and the New York Times is writing about the lawsuit against you, you are going to have pain and you are not going to want to do it again. I think it is a negative, a disincentive, let's call it a disincentive. So perpetrators, when you go through the criminal justice system and you don't get convicted or you don't even go to trial, you just go back and maybe you're more careful. But organizations usually, maybe this is more my hope and my optimism, that they're not going to do it again. And hopefully, what we do is that we, through the kind of work that you're doing, not just as a therapist, but with the podcasts, I have a huge number of people who come to me and say, I heard you on a podcast and you said XYZ. And I thought, oh, wow. Like somebody is talking to the issues of their experience.
Right.
And so through podcasts, through documentaries, through media, through therapy, my hope is that we develop an awareness. So I'll give you an example. I was practicing law in 1991 or two when Anita Hill,
Oh, yes.
right, came forward with sexual harassment claims against Clarence Thomas. That was a debacle. It was unbelievably bad. That she had the courage to do that is just unbelievable to me. But look what it did. That's the thing that I have to say. So I can tell you that I was practicing law in 1991 and I had never seen a sex harassment case. Never seen one. But after that, we saw hundreds. And it's changed the environment. It's changed the environment so much that I now say that corporate America is doing a better job about sexual misconduct than religious America is.
Oh, right. Okay. Right.
Because there are, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like the story you're telling about the company firing
Yes.
the person, right? That became clear to them that was the right course of action.
And maybe not out of the goodness of their heart.
Right.
Maybe not because they thought that they, were standing on the side of the survivor or the woman, but because there's liability attached to it. And if there's something that corporations do not want, it's liability. And so my hope is that we get enough traction that these religious organizations understand that they are liable. And that it becomes something where people are on the board of directors or within the organizations are saying, oh, there was this other case over here against this Buddhist group, or there was a case against a yoga organization, or, the Methodists or the Catholics, or, whatever it may be, that they begin to understand in the same way that we saw the trajectory of sex harassment in the workplace go from being at zero of an issue to being really a hot button issue for at least a decade. And now everybody understands, most people, sex harassment in an organization like a corporation or a business. That's the goal, is for them to stop doing it. That we make it a big enough issue that people say, wow, I don't want to be involved in this organization if this is what's going to happen.
Yes. Right. Right. And I think, people, they don't want to be the only voice and they don't want to be the first voice.
Absolutely.
And so having Anita Hill, who's so poised and bright and had it together and had so much evidence, still just having her be able to be heard, having the whole Me Too movement. I mean, it was life-changing.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Wow.
Nobody wants to be the first. I find that all the time, and I understand that completely. But some people will.
Mhm.
and good for them.
So, yes.
What
Yes.
courage and bravery it takes to be the first, what bravery it takes to actually begin to question some of this in organizations where people's families are still living. I
Mhm.
mean, there's just
Mhm.
so much grief and loss for
Mhm.
people who stand up and say, I can't be in this organization because I think it's bad. I think it's damaging me. There's so
Right.
much loss involved in leaving, which is
Right.
why people stay.
Yes. Yes. I think also knowing that people have this feeling of connection with a leader, no matter how they've
Mhm.
been treated, but that leader is somehow their link to what a
Yeah.
deity or is a parent figure or both. And so you don't attack dad and you don't attack
No.
mom. And so there's this
Right.
whole other layer. So coming in and having to let people know what's really happened and trying to make a difference, trying to move things, it's so hard. I can't imagine. I Someone said it's like riding a ship, and I said it's almost like plate tectonics, like, it's like moving
Yeah.
a continent, right? How do you get that? And the just also how long it takes, and that you need to sustain that level of energy and
Yes.
courage over a long stretch of time, which I'm sure because you're there linking arms with your clients, you're needing to kind of keep them empowered and brave to keep going with it. I'm assuming that's
Yes.
part of what you do.
Yes, absolutely it is. And for all of the difficulties of the civil justice system, of which there are many,
Mhm.
we only talked about the statute of limitations, but there are others. I mean, one are the laws themselves, and which do not give us, a definition of consent that is workable for some of these situations. But for all its difficulties, what I will say is for most of the people that we have worked with, both men and women, that there has been a sense of healing. And I don't know why that is. You probably would know more than I. But what people say is, and I think that this is part of it, is that your agency has been taken away in these high demand, high control organizations, and your voice has been taken away. And so all of a sudden, when you said linked arms, Rachel, it
Mhm.
reminded me that, that's, you know, we as lawyers have been privileged, in my view, to have received an education in the law, to be able to practice the law, and to be
Mhm.
able to stand in front of clients and speak their story until
Mm.
they are able to speak it themselves in their own voices.
Oh.
So when we write a complaint
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
goes to the court, we are really writing somebody's story that they have told to us and that we have put it out there. It goes into a court where it is on the public docket so that
Mhm.
anyone can see it. And it is, for many people, the first time that they've ever been able to have their story listened to, believed, and heard. I think that
Right.
is healing for many people if they're in the right place and able to do it.
Mhm. Yes. Yes, it is very healing. Letting someone know that they matter, what happened to them matters. A lot of people come out of these situations really so devalued, feeling like they're nothing. And because that's part of the teaching. A lot of them have to
Yes.
sort of adopt this idea that they are nothing, that they are this empty vessel, and what happens to them then doesn't matter. So just to be reminded that they matter is, I think, mind blowing for a lot of people, and that people care. Yes, it is very healing, and also knowing that what they can do is also gonna have an exponential impact. It's gonna help others. I mean, that is really very powerful for a lot of people, and that someone is willing to fight for them because it's never, ever happened before.
Yeah, exactly. We had a woman whose case we took, and it was a difficult consent case. It really was a difficult case, but we took it knowing that we might lose, and we did. We lost at the very first opportunity for the defendants to get out, which is called a motion to dismiss. The judge dismissed our claim. And we, of course, felt terrible, and our client felt terrible. But she said that what she took solace in was that she had dragged this man on his knees to the door of the courthouse. And even though the door did not open for her, that she had made that happen.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Right. That even for a moment, she
Yeah.
gave him pause or worry
Yes.
or
Yes.
felt powerful
Yes.
enough to be able to
Mhm.
do that.
Yeah. It takes away some of the fear. I think survivors are often afraid of the
Mhm.
power of the leader of these organizations. And
Mhm.
knowing that there is some force out there
Mhm.
that can pull them into a courthouse
Mhm.
is some measure of healing.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I think also knowing that they have to deal with harassment all the while. I mean, it happens. I've dealt with harassment. I'm sure you've dealt with harassment.
Yeah.
And, being followed, being threatened, whatever else, just, I say that not trying to make light of it. It's just been many years that it's happened, mostly by Scientology. They're engaging in this fair game policy that they say they don't have, but they use all the time. So they keep proving that they have it. What I think is really important then is to have a community, is to have, right, to have your people.
Yes.
And so what would you advise people who are dealing with this? I mean, who can their people be? Who are the people out there? It's their attorney, but who have you found have been
Yeah.
really good to have in people's courts?
I have found such an interesting question because it's not available all the time. But I've had a number of cases in which the ex members who have left over decades have stood up. And because some of them have been trying to make change without having a legal claim, been trying to make change for decades and been unsuccessful. And so when somebody actually is there standing in the place of a plaintiff who has a case, I've had very positive experiences with groups of ex members who have really, rushed to the support of the survivors and of the survivors who have a claim, let's say, and the survivors who are going to make a claim. And I have a group in Canada, for example, that came together long before there was a legal claim, but a woman came forward on a Facebook page, talked about having been assaulted by a religious leader. Within, I think, a week, they had a Facebook page. They had hundreds of people on that page. Other women came forward and told their stories, and they stayed with the survivors, and it gave the survivors enough strength to actually then engage in a lawsuit. And I think a small group of that group actually meets with some of the survivors on a regular basis. And so ex members can be a tremendous support because they know they've left for a reason. And it's probably because they saw something wasn't right. And therefore, they're in a position to understand emotionally, psychologically, intellectually what a survivor is going through.
So incredibly important.
And then therapy groups. Don't you think, Rachel,
Yeah.
that the therapy groups, I know you have some groups, I know Heartwood has a group. Those, I think, are very helpful for people understanding that they are not alone.
Right. It is very powerful. I think people, even in those groups, they still share things with hesitation because they're so used to not being believed. There's also this thing that happens, I notice, even with the Heartwood group was incredible. And thank you for the reminder about this fantastic organization. And we'll post a link to it also in the show notes. That sometimes when people tell their stories, there's this hesitation as they're talking, because it's like they have this negative self-talk that they've learned. Your story isn't important. You're a liar. You don't realize that this was a gift to you and you're being unappreciative and you're going to get punished. And so these delays, I will sometimes say to people, How many questions just ran through your head to make you doubt what you were going to say next? Was it 20, 30, 70?
Yes,
Like, what
yes,
happened?
many.
They're like, yes, I couldn't. I had to make my way like over these hurdles through this thing to just know that I had the right to say this and that it was real and it was true and that someone would care and someone would believe me. But they have to fight against all these internalized messages to keep them quiet, really. So as we're finishing up, which is hard to do because I love talking to you, tell us about just some things for us to keep our eye on, in terms of where the legal system is going, or if we know people in this situation, should they be collecting data? What is going to be helpful for people moving into this?
Well, I think for anyone who wants to be an advocate, that the statute of limitations is a place where anybody could contact their state legislator and say,
Mm.
hey, why do we have a short statute of limitations? Let me tell you the reasons why that doesn't work. And I mean, New York and California, Colorado, I think Arizona has changed their statute of limitations for children, but I think it needs to be for children and adults. And so that's one thing. So for those people who are interested in legislative advocacy,
Yeah.
even just at the level, as I said, of just contacting your legislator's office and saying, I'd like to see you, support something like that. I think that helps. I think that when you come into contact with people who've been in these groups or who are in them now, I get so many calls. I know you must, Rachel, also from parents whose children are in cults. And they say to me, how can I persuade them to get out? And I tell them, you can't. It's very hard to persuade people who are in. You need to love them, keep the lines of communication open, and that someday. And so it's the same thing for all of us. When we meet people who are in these coercive things, we're not going to persuade them to come out, just support them and, hope that the light goes on someday. For people who are out, I think trying to understand, first of all, that could have been you. So, this whole business of I would never be in that situation, we've got to get rid of that and say, I could have done the same thing. You are not. I can't tell you how many survivors start out telling me, I can't believe I was so dumb.
Oh, it's such a shame.
It's the negative self-talk. So we don't want to, as allies, to reinforce that. We want to be saying, you were the kind of person that our society needs, a person who trusts, a person who wants a better life for themselves and for others, who wants a better world. We need to point the finger at the person who betrayed those values, at the people who are exhibiting them. And so I think for all of us, as we come into contact with people who've been in these organizations, that's how we can support them, by understanding that they are the kind of people that culturally hold civilizations together, and that who we ought to be blaming are the people who are the betrayers.
I hope everyone takes that in. Everyone write that down. It's so true. It's so true and right and important to remember. I think the work that you do is not at all easy. And you have to be ready to, like, dig your heels in and stay with something that, where the person you're representing is up against so much, even what's happening for them internally. And
Yes.
so I really appreciate all that you do and all that you continue to do, and let people know where they can find your work, your firm, all of it.
So I'm of counsel at McAllister Olivarius. We have our headquarters in outside of London, but my practice is in the United States and in Canada. And so maybe we'll put the website. It's McAllister Olivarius. .com, and I'm
Right.
C. Murchison at mcolaw.com. And I respond to everyone. If I don't respond to you the first time, it's because you've fallen through the cracks.
Yeah. Right.
Email again. We try to, because many people don't have a legal claim, but we try to connect people with whatever resources are out there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Carol, thank you so much for your time today and for all that you do. And I hope we get to talk again.
I do too. Thank you, Rachel.
Pleasure.